Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Conversations from Stritch. I'm joined here today by Dr. Christopher Sint, our provost. It's really wonderful to be with you again. Thank you for joining us. A couple quick things at the top of the show, and then we have a really, I think, a really exciting topic to discuss today. I did want to remind employees who might be watching that I do have tea time this afternoon, 4 o'clock, so I'm holding these virtual teas every week, and you're welcome to join me if you want. 4 o'clock on Thursday, so double dipping on Thursdays in terms of being here on campus and being able to spend some time with people. I did want to also point out a few things that are going on this week that we're excited about. This afternoon from 3 to 4, Reverend Dr. William Barber is going to be in a live virtual session on anti-racism, allyship, and action. This is today a virtual session. It was announced in University News, and so if you want to join that, that's available. Tonight, we have one of our plays this year. Again, the plays have been done in a virtual way, but starting tonight and running through the weekend, the Philip Lynch Theater is presenting Silent Sky. So we're very excited about that and hope that you can join the Philip Lynch Theater. Tickets are on sale, so if you want to get a ticket for this weekend's performances, and it's up on the website and on your screen right now. And then I just wanted to announce that next week, we're very excited to have Dr. Sint again, who's going to be leading. We've been doing these faculty expert panels. They've been very successful. We did one on COVID and understanding the virus last semester, one on kind of the voting issue, but we're doing one on democracy. So we're going to have one on democracy that's going to feature Dr. Lorette Leeson from political science, Dr. Joe Kosminski from physics, and Dr. Mark Schultz from our history department. So some exciting things continue to happen on campus. We're grateful for all the people that are making those things possible, both kind of the experts that are in each one of these and our actors, but also the people behind the scenes, because it does, as we have often noted here, we can't do this show without our student workers, as well as John and Joe, who are helping to make this possible. But all the virtual events that we do across campus, they're made possible because so many people are doing the scheduling and the IT stuff and all the stuff that makes it possible to do those virtual events. So thanks to all of them. A couple of quick announcements athletically. We do have a match tonight that is happening. A couple contests in basketball. So Southwest Baptist is playing both our men's and women's basketball teams down at Southwest Baptist. So our teams are probably, maybe they've arrived by now, but if not, they're still on the road on the bus. We also have a dome tournament that's starting today and running through the weekend for our women's softball team. That's happening up in Des Plaines at the Parkway Bank Sports Complex. Also wanted to congratulate our men's lacrosse team. They were down in Quincy. You know, it's a relatively new program, and they had a great win this week, so congratulations to them. And of course, we also want to congratulate our swim team. Last weekend, they completed the GLVC tournament, coming in 6th place. And, you know, that's out of 14 teams, that's really excellent work. So congratulations to our swimmers, and of course, congratulations again to our senior swimmers who are wrapping up their collegiate swimming career. The biggest news this week, and this is my transition to Dr. Sint, is to congratulate Dr. Sint, and he'll introduce our guest today, Dr. Tennille Allen, on receiving a grant on Legacies of American Slavery. I know that Chris will be talking a little bit about COVID stuff, but I really did want to transition to congratulate him, thank him for all the work. There was tons of work by many people that they'll talk about in more detail in a little bit that went into this project and made it possible. But this is a huge success. We are the only Midwest school that received this. And I really think it pushes forward our belief in one of our core values of justice, but also fundamentally in our commitment to being an anti-racist community here on this campus. And part of that is owning the legacy that slavery has on both us as a Lewis University community, but on Illinois and the region. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Christopher Sent. Congratulations and thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here, and I appreciate that. And as you said, Dr. Allen will be on in a minute or so as my co-director of this project, and also so many people participated in the writing of the grant, the initial grant, and the process that we went through as a finalist to receive this Legacies of American Slavery award and grant. So we'll talk about that in a bit. And at the very end of our presentation, we do have a list of people who serve as our steering committee for the group and really are as a collaborative group really making it happen. I do want to just make a couple of really reminders, COVID related before I introduce Dr. Allen. Please remember that the CDC has put out. So, well, let me back up and say, my usual Thursday email will be going out today at about 1 o'clock. It will have a link to the new CDC guidelines around masking. It's really advice about best practices around masking and using masks with 2 layers and things like that. So we will talking about that today in the email, as well as doing some kind of educational campaigns around that. So please mask up as much as possible. If you, for some reason, have found your way to campus without a face covering, remember that they are available in dean's offices, they are available in residence halls, and they're available in the student activities office. So just ask. The reminder to do the symptom screening on the app every day when you're on campus, and residential students every day that you're here. And then I just wanted to dwell a little bit on how vitally important it is to participate in the contact tracing process if you are contacted about it. So our COVID-19 hotline team, either through the app or by phone or email, will reach out to people if for some reason there's a need to talk to you about a location on a sports team or in a classroom or something like that. And it's really, really important and part of the Flyers promise that people respond quickly to those messages so that we can make sure we do a thorough contact tracing of every positive case on campus. The reminder to stay home if you have any of the symptoms, and the best way to ask yourself or to think about it is that the screening app or the screening tile on the app has a list of symptoms. If you have any of those symptoms and would say yes to them before coming to campus, then absolutely stay home. And if you have any questions about that, you can always contact the COVID-19 hotline team. We're making a little bit of a transition, or have made a transition, in the testing on campus. So because of the cold and some other factors, we canceled last week's testing and this week's testing. That we don't know for sure, but that will likely be the case for a while. What we're hearing is that the Will County and the state of Illinois are doing they continue to do as much or more testing as ever, but they're moving toward very large testing sites and doing more higher scale testing. So we may phase out as a testing site. It may come back. It just really depends on the ebb and flow of things in the county. But for the foreseeable future, we don't have any scheduled testing sites on campus. My email today will remind everyone, and this is available on the website, that there's a clearinghouse website to look up for testing sites as well as vaccination centers, and the app also has those resources readily available. We had a really successful vaccination clinic last Saturday on campus, and that was done by Jewel Osco, and they organized the whole thing. We're really just a home for this particular vaccination clinic that they do. We will likely do more of those, but there are not any scheduled at the current time. It's really nice, as I think I might have said last week, that that our nursing students were able to participate in the clinic on site, and I know many of our nursing students are able to do that in their clinical placements as well. So that's been exciting, and we've even maybe talked about having a show in the next couple weeks where we can kind of talk about that experience with some of our students. So
before you transition, can I just ask one question? Because maybe you alluded to it quickly, but I do want to re-emphasize or ask you. I'm just going to ask you, even though I know the answer. How are we doing on just number of positive cases this semester? I know that we put this up on the website and people can check it, and we know that that's available to people. But just kind of a general sense, because this sense of where we were at last semester, 4 weeks in, and kind of where we're at this semester, 4 weeks in. I know there's still activity on the hotline team, but how are we doing on just general cases? Because I think our audience is, they're interested in what's going on.
Yeah, sure. The overall numbers are significantly lower so far this semester than they were last semester. There's the current numbers from Tuesday on the screen there. The trends have stayed low. We had a different beginning of the semester where there was a lot of testing was required for the beginning of the semester for move-in and residence halls and so on. So there was some activity there as people were doing testing right before coming. But since the beginning of the semester, it's been relatively low. There are, even though the positive case numbers among our student population has been very small, there have been some larger some exposures and quarantines and so on. So you could see on that last tracking update on the website that there's like a 4% quarantine rate, something like that, and that that indicates that there are people in quarantine and students who are in the residence halls quarantining and at home quarantining, and that it's requires flexibility by faculty and so on. So that's definitely a similar dynamic to the fall semester, but at this point in the semester, there's been a lot fewer cases.
Yeah, that's really all I wanted to get at is this, there is a somewhat complicated dynamic that you and I have talked about. Fewer cases actually going on, but some larger quarantines. Some of that is just the way that the cases have happened, or the way that, one case and where it happened to be, who happened to be there at the time, right, being extra cautious so we really hold this number down. So I would want people that are watching that might end up in a situation where you hear that these 10 people are being quarantined, that what's going on. Do we have a lot of cases? One, go back to the website and check it, because that data is updated a couple times a week. But the number of cases is actually significantly down, as it is across the country and in Will County. And we are continuing to do that contact tracing that you mentioned, continuing to follow up, continue to ask people to be in quarantine. But I think the general numbers are very positive on the COVID front for us right now, and we're very excited about the vaccinations, as you said. So now I think we can turn over to Legacies of American Slavery, and I think you and Dr. Allen will be able to kind of do most of the rest of the show, so thanks.
Okay, great. So I'm very pleased to introduce Professor Tennille Allen, and I'm going to introduce her a little bit before we bring her on. Dr. Allen is a professor of sociology and currently the chair of the sociology department. She holds a PhD from Northwestern, and her primary teaching and research interests are in the intersections of race, class, gender, identity, and place. She is a prolific scholar, and I'm not going to name all of her tremendous contributions. We might ask her about some of them after we talk about the Legacies of American Slavery a little bit. So I think I'll leave it at that and just say welcome, Tennille. Hello. Great to be with you. Hi, great to see you.
It's such a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us, Tennille.
So, what we're going to do is that Tennille and I are together are going to kind of talk through some of the parameters of Legacies of American Slavery, project in the way that it's going to work, or that way that we're in the very first stages of planning the way it's going to work at Lewis. So if we could, I think we have a presentation to put up, and I will begin by talking through it a little bit. So and we can go on to the next thing, but I guess maybe the first thing to say is that it's a 3-year project. As Dr. Livingston said, we have been awarded this opportunity from the Council of Independent Colleges. It is about $280,000, $300,000 of money to spend dedicated to this project. And we were selected to be one of 6 regional campuses across the country. And I don't remember Tennille, if you remember, but I think it was there were about 60 or 70 applicants or people who applied for this initially, and we went through many stages to be chosen as a regional center. We are the only university in the Midwest that is part of this group, so it's both a national group as well as a singular responsibility for us to represent our region, or to be a clearinghouse for our region, which includes a lot of CIC institutions. So the project nationwide is designed to explore the impact of slavery on the American life and culture. And it focuses in these 3 big areas. Research that happens in kind of traditional ways on campus by faculty, but we will define that as broadly as possible. Teaching and learning, again, could mean a whole lot of different things, but curriculum, particular pedagogies, and other learning strategies for students both inside and outside of the classroom. And a big emphasis of the project is community-based programs, so that having relationships, our network of strong community partners was certainly a huge plus for us in the application process. And I guess I just want to maybe back up and say quickly that this is part of a larger effort across campus to really build on our strength in our community. All of the networks, people like Tennille and many other faculty and staff on campus have spent many years developing strong network of relationships and community, and I feel like we're really building on that and pushing further, and this project is just one of many things that are going on campus that are exciting around that topic. One of the primary characteristics of the project is that one of the first activities that we're going to do is host on our campus a regional convening. I guess another word for that is a conference among Midwestern CIC institutions. So we'll bring primarily faculty, maybe students together for a meeting place and really have a conversation about this topic and about where to go in the next couple of years over the period of the project. And then the last thing I'll say, and I'll ask Tennille to describe these things, is that we were selected for 2 particular themes, and I'll just let you take it away with those 2 themes, Tennille.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the lovely introduction, and thank you for being such a wonderful partner on this project. And I'll say before I even start talking about the themes that I think is very fortuitous that we get to announce this during Black History Month. And I think that it certainly is in line with our conversation later on this afternoon with Reverend Dr. William Barber, because this helps us to ground some of this work that we're doing in anti-racism. And in doing that, we'll address these legacy themes from the CIC that we proposed to study, that we received this grant for, were to study the impacts of enslavement on current day processes around race, place, and migration, and mass incarceration. So I'm really excited that we get a chance to build not only on those strong relationships that you just mentioned, Dr. Sent, but also we get to build on these faculty strengths that we have in these areas as well. So it's a really exciting time and a really exciting project to be a part of.
Great. And
could you tell me a little bit about the mass incarceration theme?
Of course.
Dr. Allen, I know we have a slide up there, and I don't know if it's necessary to put that up, but I am interested in, both, maybe both of you, or especially you, can talk about, why you chose these themes among the themes that were possible, and why you think especially Lewis is situated well to kind of talk about these themes, and what is, for some of our viewers, what is mass incarceration and why is it directly connected to the legacy of American slavery?
Sure. So I think in answering your questions, it really is around where Lewis is located and where Lewis is situated, both geographically, but also in terms of some faculty strengths. So, given the fact that our campus is less than 5 miles away from both Stateville Correctional Facility as well as the old Joliet Prison, both sites, notorious sites of mass incarceration in the nation, it just really is building on that place based strength as well as our faculty expertise. And when we're talking about mass incarceration, we're really talking about a set of practices that began in the 1970s and exploded by the time we got into the 1990s. And it really has this disproportionate impact on African American communities, certainly communities like the ones that I'm from in Chicago and communities that surround our university. So we can think about places like Joliet, we can think about places like Fairmont, we can think about other surrounding suburbs and small towns. And it really helps us to understand not just what these practices, not just what these policies mean on a large scale as we're thinking about mass incarceration as a word that we hear often, especially since the summer, but what it also means for residents of communities that are subjected to um, a lot of hypersurveillance, a lot of criminalization of both the places that they live in as well as the people who live in that place. And I think that that was really a strength of our team because we were able to talk about the ways that we could see not just mass incarceration working, but how it is very intricately tied with place. If we think about the histories of segregation, if we think about the histories of redlining, if we think about the histories of some surrounding towns that have histories as sundown towns, we can think about how there's this through line between housing policies that rely on segregation and mass incarceration policies that hyper surveil people in these communities that were created right through these processes of segregation that are very much rooted in racial exclusion, that very much flow out of enslavement and the Jim Crow South and practices and policies that followed the great migrants as they came from places like Alabama and Mississippi and Tennessee and found their way not just to places like Chicago, right, which is a very heavily studied city when it comes to these themes, but smaller towns and suburbs like the ones that we're surrounded by in suburban Cook County and certainly at Lewis and Will County.
So could you just, I know that we have a slide that shows it, but could you help, that, as you say, they came up, so the Great Migration, could you just talk about the, kind of temporally, when did that happen? And why, it didn't just influence Chicago, but it significantly influenced Chicago. But that map also shows how it went to different, northern areas of the country. Could you talk a little bit about that? And maybe we could show that slide.
Sure, of course. So, shortly after enslavement end, there's this period where things look very hopeful for the formerly enslaved, right? Reconstruction happens, and African Americans who had been enslaved were able to own property. They were able to attend schools, and then that ended, right, almost as soon as it began. And shortly thereafter, we started to see a number of Black people leaving the South for cities throughout the north, right? So this is part of where we see these arrows directing us toward New York and places like New Jersey, places like Boston, places like Philadelphia on the East Coast. We can also think about those migrants who left places like Louisiana and Texas and found their way west, right? They made their way to places like San Francisco, Oakland, Los Angeles, Seattle. And then in our region, we see a number of people, as I mentioned earlier, coming from Alabama and Mississippi, Tennessee, Arkansas, finding their way to St. Louis, finding their way to Chicago, finding their way to Milwaukee, to Detroit, but also to places like Joliet, where there were opportunities for greater work, opportunities for greater political participation, opportunities for economic participation. But there were some constraints on that as well. And that's part of what we'll be looking at in this grant and the research that it funds and the projects that it funds. We'll look at those experiences of the great migrants and their descendants, and how, even though this is a story about migration, it's also a story about people being locked into place through policies, through programs, through processes of racial exclusion that end up looking like the segregated communities that we're so familiar with today.
Yeah, and I would just add that the community partnerships that we have developed over decades reflect that situatedness or that plate that reflect our location and our connection to this history that Dr. Allen is describing. And so we're in this nexus or this combination of having our home place here be deeply connected to these themes. Our faculty expertise is connected to these themes, and also really our community, for obvious reason, is drenched or impacted permanently by the legacies of slavery. And so it's our projects are kind of geared around having a deeper investigation of all of those connections. So our first responsibility in the project is to do a couple of activities. We had to propose, in order to get to this stage, a couple of very specific projects that we're going to work on. The conversation among our CIC partners at next year's conference, and the conversations among our Lewis community, including our student community, will probably lead to other projects further on down the line, but we are going to start with two that we've mapped out. And so I'll describe the first one, and I think it's the next slide, is really about the public presentation and engagement with the theme. And so we have discussed or connected with the old Joliet prison, which is clearly a central player in this history. And at that site or at that location, we plan to do community programming and educational opportunities and performance opportunities in that space over the next year or so. And during the COVID restriction time, it may start in a small way in the fall and then expand into next spring and hopefully beyond. But essentially a regular series of art, performance, presentations, and workshops that can take place in that historical location. And then our Legacies of American Slavery team, including students doing work in connection to it through courses and other co-curricular activities, will be the kind of engine behind it, but very much in partnership with our community partners. And Tennille, you can maybe talk about the second activity.
Sure. So if we can bring up that next slide, the second activity looks at taking research that's being done currently by faculty and students in departments like history, my home department of sociology, computer science, criminal justice, education, and other disciplines, and using that research in order to build a multimedia app that really shows, that really highlights, that really illuminates the ways that race and place are going to intersect and have this really strong impact on people's experiences in our surrounding communities. And what we're planning with this app is the ability for people who use it to be able to take self guided tours of the communities, and not just to see what's there, but also to get a sense of the people who live there and their experiences. So we'll use, for example, research collected by students in sociology classes, where they go into the community and do interviews to collect oral histories on both people's experiences as well as that community history. So as part of the app, we'll not only have these self-guided tours, but we'll also do mapping so we can illuminate not only these arrows leading from the south to Joliet, to Fairmont, to Lockport, but also maps around redlining, maps around uh, I think a lot about COVID, right? And the very racially disparate ways that COVID impacts communities. So we might do mapping around that. We'll use this app to really highlight the community history. And we are going to build, as you were saying earlier, Chris, on some of those really strong relationships with community partners in Joliet and Lockport, and certainly building on work that a number of faculty members, a number of co-curricular, a number of students are doing in Fairmont currently and going forward as well.
And we're calling this a pilot. We don't want to be too prescriptive about what other, where this goes from here as other people learn about the project and get inspired by it. But one idea that keeps coming back to me is how the Fairmont community focused app or location on the app could be a model for other communities in connection to other universities along that Great Migration route that we were just looking at the map for. So we would at least invite other universities and other communities to do something once we have it developed as a pilot project. So we have a question that came through, and maybe this is a good reminder to ask questions through the Ask Us portal. And we're going to maybe talk with Dr. Allen for 5 or 10 more minutes. So so we'll keep looking to see if questions come through as we go. But the great question came in, which is, and I'd like you to maybe reflect on this a little bit, but what are some of the ways that students can get involved in this project?
Sure. So I think there are any number of ways that students can and will get involved in the project. We are certainly thinking around ways that this can be built into class projects, right? There are certainly a number of connections to the Office of Community and Engaged Learning that we have with community organizations, with groups, with people in these communities. So I can certainly see this being embedded in some of those community engaged learning classes. If faculty members so desire, there are certainly going to be opportunities for students in some of their co-curricular organizations as well. I can see students doing performances, right, where they might um, help create art, whether we're talking about poetry, whether we're talking about photography projects, whether we're talking about other forms of creative and artistic expressions that will really allow students to participate in this project as well.
Sounds great. And just as I was sitting here thinking about it, and I know we've talked about this a lot already, but I'm wondering if maybe like an idea that just occurred to me that I probably shouldn't say right now in front of everyone because it might not be a good idea, is to somehow have an indicator of a Legacies of American Slavery course or co-curricular activity. Not that that would mean any, it wouldn't mean a lot in terms of graduation requirements, but it would just be a way for students to say, oh, if I, volunteer to be part of this club or this particular co-curricular thing, it's going to connect in some way, or the work that we're going to do is going to connect. And obviously the same would be true for courses, whether that be in the fine arts or in sociology or history or what have you. It would just be maybe a way for people to know that they could anticipate, being part of it that way. And I'm sure that there will be any kind of, there's no specific major requirement or anything like that. Just to be clear, there'll be ways of volunteering even through campus ministry or other ways that we have for students to do service in connection to our campus. So if you don't have any questions about this grant, I might ask Professor Allen a couple things about herself. We always like to learn more about our faculty during these opportunities that you're with us. So could you just, maybe to begin, there might be people watching this video who are interested in the major or might be interested in applying to Lewis or what have you. So what does a sociology major study?
So my quick and dirty answer to that is everything. If we were on campus, I would take people by my office and show them a poster that says sociology is everywhere, right? So The way that a sociologist, Howard Becker, describes sociology is the study of people doing things together. And I think that really gets into the heart of what it is that we do in sociology, what it is that we do as sociologists. We're really just concerned with the the behaviors, the actions, the things that people do in their everyday lives and how they understand their actions, how they understand their behaviors, how they understand what it is that they're doing. We also look at how this isn't just about the individual, right? That doing things together part becomes really important because sociology is inherently social. And it really is the study of groups. It really is a study of how it is that we can understand ourselves in relationship to the groups that we're a part of, in a relationship to the institutions, the social structures, the societies that we are parts of. I think one of the promises of sociology, too, is that not only does it give us this understanding of the social world, it helps us to not only see where we are and how we got there, but it allows us to see a path forward. It allows us to think about how it is that we can create the worlds that we want to inhabit. And I think that's what really drew me to sociology. And that's typically what I hear my faculty colleagues as well as students talking about, how it really helps them to understand the world that they're in and the ways that they can shape it and create it to achieve, as you were saying earlier, Dr. Livingston, more justice.
And looking at a little bit at your scholarly career, it seems like you've really embodied that in terms of the, applying that lens of that kind of analytical lens and the justice lens to a lot of different topics. So you've focused on, intimate relationships, on African American girls, and most recently on food. And I just wonder if maybe you could talk about how you choose what you write about, and then maybe tell us a little bit about your most recent project.
Sure. So I think that part of what I'm always interested in is community. The community in terms of the physical community, right? The spaces that we find ourselves in, but also community in terms of who we're connected to. And I think that's always the kind of bright light that shines in my mind whenever I become interested in a topic. And in thinking about work that I do, especially with Black girls and women, I'm always interested in how Black girls and women create community um, within their social groups, right? And how they understand what it means to be a Black girl, what it means to be a Black woman. And I think that one of the ways that I always see my work is connected back to these questions around place and identity. And I think that's part of what led me to the most recent project. I have a book coming out later this year called Food Inequalities. And it's really looking at the ways that we do this thing that we always do, right? That we so often take for granted, eat, right? And we can think about how sociology allows us to see how the foods that we eat aren't just functions of our taste preferences. They aren't just about what we have a craving for, but they're really around the cultures that we're part of and also around the places that we are. So if we are in low income communities, for example, if we're in rural communities, for example, if we're in a place like Texas right now that's being hit by a barrage of um, terrible winter weather that they aren't used to, right? We can think about how that certainly limits access to food. And place is a story through which we can understand food a lot better. And in that book, I look a lot at how place and race and class intersect in order to shape who has access to what types of foods.
That's amazing, and sounds like, I mean, just such important work, and I'm, just delighted to, looking forward to reading it. Comes out in May, I think, if it's
Yes.
still on schedule. No, these things don't always work, especially during
Yeah.
COVID. But yeah, well, congratulations on that and for everything. It's just incredible work.
Thank you.
Do you have any?
Well, just I guess I would just say one thing, Tania. One, yeah, thank you for all the work you're doing and really helping all of us to understand the world we live in better. My assumption, I'm going to do one of these things that I sometimes try to do, which is to take what I think is popular culture understandings and tie them into what you're doing at a much deeper level. But a lot of people have heard on the news about food deserts, and I assume that language you're unpacking in a much more sophisticated and really giving it its roots so that somebody on a news show can do a 30-minute soundbite on a food desert, but you're kind of one of the people in this country and around the world who's analyzing it on a deeper level and giving them the substance that allows them to make the claims, and then of course gives politicians the ammunition to try to fix those food deserts. So is that accurate? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's kind of how I translate it into, understandings of what average person who just watches the news hears.
That's definitely a very accurate reflection, right? So it's looking at these terms that we hear, things like food deserts, things like food apartheid, things like food swamps, right? And thinking about how it is that these get created. And I'm so glad that you mentioned giving politicians the ammunition, right? Because we should always think about how it is that our understandings should reflect and create policies that address the inequalities that we're talking about, that we're discovering through the work that we're doing.
Yes,
And I
and
also want
yeah.
to make sure,
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I really wanted to make sure that I mentioned that part of the reason that I got interested in this topic really was through some of the community based work that I was doing with a community partner. We had worked with the Warren Sharp Community Center in Joliet, where an urban farm was established. It was really that relationship with the former executive director, Kay Bolden, and her kids that really had me seeing this world, right, in ways that made me interested when I started to hear those 30-second sound bites I would hear on the nightly news.
Sure. And it's a loss for the community that Kay moved out west, but she is such a wonderful woman and was so influential on the Joliet community. So, a shout out to her and her family. They're so influential on Joliet. And I guess I just want to, highlight and, a deep thank you to you for the research that you're doing, but also as a way of saying to our community, so many of our faculty do this kind of work that takes the values of the Lasallian tradition, these deep core values that we have as a university, and embed them in their research in a way, as you said, that really changes the world. We want to be a place in which not every single piece of research that we do, but that the majority of research that we do is, bends that arc of justice. That it's a long process, and we as scholars have a role to play in giving the people who have chosen either, being in administration or being in politics, that ability to do the action. And without that back and forth between scholarship and activity, the kind of praxis of this work, we don't change the world. And we want to change the world. We want to use education to make the world, as you said earlier, into a place that we want to live. Like, what are the communities we want to live in? And that requires an understanding first before we can move into the change. So thank you for all that, and I'll turn it back to you, Chris.
I think we really want to do one more thing, which is show that final slide while you're talking about community and collaboration, of all of the incredible people who have worked together to make this possible. So their names are there. We won't go over them all, but great working group, and I hope it's just the beginning. And if there are faculty who are interested in participating, please let us know. And if colleagues or students can reach out to anybody on this list in terms of finding out more about the work as it progresses over the spring semester. And I want to say one more thing, looking at this slide, which is we have never thanked Jim Cowan for the incredible work he's done. He always creates the slides for this program, and so he also helped us a lot with the design of our presentation that Tennille and I, in a very stressful day, had to present to receive this award in the first place. So thank you, Jim, for your great work in making us look good all the time. And thanks so much, Tennille. I just can't say enough how excited I am to be working closely with you on this project over the next few years. So I'm super happy.
Yeah, thank you, Tennille, for joining us today, and thank you for all the work in this project.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm incredibly excited about this and everything that it will mean for students, for faculty, and certainly for our surrounding community. Thank you again for having me.
Sure. Any last comments,
No,
Chris?
that's great.
All right, so
Bye-bye.
We'll just wrap this up. I want to say thank you again to each of you for joining us, and those that will watch at a future time. This is a very exciting project. We are excited at Lewis that the semester is well underway and there's so much activity going on. And I just want to say thank you to each of you for making a Lewis University education possible, whatever role you play, for the extra work that the COVID crisis is causing for you, and your tenacity in caring for our students, and for those of you that are students, your tenacity in continuing to study in what is a challenging environment. Thank you again to those people making this possible, Jim and John and Joe, and I don't know who our student is today, but whoever our student producer is, thank you for doing that. Many blessings to you and your family. Have a wonderful week.